Welcome back to the iBidElectric podcast. Today, we are shining a light on a role that is absolutely crucial to the construction industry. I'm talking about the electrical estimator. If you've ever wondered where the numbers come from on a multi-million-dollar construction project, well, this is the person who figures it all out.
It really is the foundational role, and, it's often the most misunderstood. We're here to show you that this isn't simply an administrative task. It's probably the most genuinely strategic function within any electrical contracting firm. We're exploring not just how they count fixtures, but why their judgment fundamentally turns these complex architectural blueprints into a clear, financially executable plan.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. Let's define the core responsibility. The electrical estimator, their job is to predict the true cost of electrical work. And this can be months, sometimes even years, before a shovel ever hits the dirt.
Right, and that prediction has to be precise enough to win the job.
But also comprehensive enough to guarantee the contractor actually makes money.
It's a real tightrope walk.
Yeah.
And that precision, it requires synthesizing mountains of data.
So what goes into that final bid price?
Well, you have to factor in every single line item. You're talking about direct costs like, materials, the raw wire, conduit, the major switchgear. Then you have the indirect costs, things like equipment rentals, any subcontracted specialty work. Overhead allocation. And then, the most critical element, the quantification of risk.
That risk element, that's what elevates the job from, say, bookkeeping to pure strategy.
Absolutely. The goal is always twofold. First, the price must be competitive enough to secure the work. But it has to be structured to absolutely prevent the company from losing money once the project starts. If the estimator misses a major scope item or, say, dramatically underestimates how hard the installation is, the operations team in the field, they inherit a financial hole they just cannot dig out of.
So you're saying that every successful estimate immediately becomes the financial foundation of a project. And if that foundation is weak, maybe it's based on poor judgment about site access or an incorrect labor rate. The entire project's profitability, the schedule, even the relationship with the client is fundamentally at risk.
It's the highest stakes accounting in the entire business. And what's fascinating here is understanding how much organizational stability rests on that initial analysis. The estimator is the primary gatekeeper of profitability. They decide which projects are feasible and which ones are just, guaranteed losses masquerading as opportunities.
Okay, so if that's the strategic purpose, let's get into the day-to-day. Because I think the biggest surprise for people outside the field is that the job involves far more thinking and synthesis than most people expect. Yeah. It's not just counting things, it's understanding the plans.
That's the key distinction right there. A huge chunk of the initial work is just foundational analysis and interpretation. They're not just reviewing drawings and specs. They're effectively redlining them in their head. They have to identify the full scope. And they're calculating every foot of conduit, every piece of strut, every device box, every light fixture, and, the thousands of feet of wire connecting it all. But like we said, just counting the components isn't the complex part. The real nuance comes in applying what we call labor units. And this is where deep field experience becomes absolutely essential.
Explain that for us. What is a labor unit? Because that sounds like the real core of the financial equation.
Okay, so think of a labor unit as a standardized time value. It's the time assigned to install a specific piece of equipment, but, and this is key, under ideal conditions. So for example, installing a simple light switch might have a base unit of, say, 0.2 hours.
But those ideal conditions almost never exist on a real job site.
Exactly. So the estimator has to modify that base rate based on reality.
How do they do that?
They look at the plans and they apply what we call labor multipliers or installation factors. For instance, is the crew working 30 feet in the air off a scissor lift?
Okay, that's going to take longer.
Right, so that requires a multiplier for staging the equipment and for safety. Or is the conduit pull going through a heavily congested ceiling in a data center? That complexity requires a significant multiplier, maybe even doubling or tripling the standard labor unit.
Wow.
That ability to accurately apply those multipliers based on perceived difficulty is what separates a profitable bid from a losing one.
And the margin for error here is huge. I mean, are we talking about a variance of like 5% in labor hours, or can that judgment swing the cost by 50%?
Oh, easily 50% on the labor side, especially on complex industrial or large commercial projects. If you assume ideal conditions when the reality is, say, confined space access and a multi-phase installation, you just fundamentally underpriced your labor. And labor is usually the single largest variable cost in an electrical bid.
Now let's pivot a little from the internal analysis. This job has a massive external communication component. The estimator is constantly interfacing with the market.
It is a critical balancing act. They're constantly engaging with vendors, manufacturers, and sub-suppliers. They're evaluating current commodity pricing,
Yeah.
copper, steel confirming equipment availability, and getting firm quotes for major gear like switchboards and transformers.
And that coordination isn't just about price, right? It's about compliance and value engineering.
That's right. They have to ensure that the equipment they're planning to bid meets both the design specifications and all the relevant local and national codes. And what's more, during pre-construction, they'll often work with vendors to suggest alternate equipment.
Something cheaper, maybe? Or just more readily available.
Exactly. Or easier to install, all without compromising the design intent. That ability to value engineer early is a huge value add for the client.
This leads us right to the biggest misconception about this role. The idea that estimating is primarily just a simple math-based job. While the calculation is obviously mandatory, the core truth is that judgment matters profoundly more.
And this raises the important question of variability. Why is judgment so crucial? Because you can give the same set of highly detailed plans to two very experienced estimators, both using excellent software, and they can still produce final bids that vary significantly.
And that difference comes from where?
It stems entirely from their unique understanding of installation logistics, the local labor market's productivity, and fundamentally, their subjective assessment of the inherent construction risk.
They really have to think like builders. It's not enough to just count the lengths of conduit.
No, they have to mentally construct the entire job before it begins. They have to visualize the installation sequence. Which crew starts first? How will they receive and store large pieces of equipment?
Where will crews be staging? Where will access be limited, forcing slower work?
It's that ability to truly build the job in your head that separates the adequate estimators from the excellent ones.
And this visualization skill is tied directly to detailed risk assessment.
It's inseparable. They aren't just pricing known quantities. They are pricing the consequences of project constraints. They have to factor in things like an aggressive schedule with liquidated damages clauses, which might require overtime.
Or what about severe access limitations, like working only at night in an occupied hospital?
Yes, or the phasing of the work. Can it be done continuously, or will it be broken into 5 difficult stop-and-start phases? All of that has a cost.
So how do they quantify that risk? Do they just add a lump sum at the end?
The best estimators, the most sophisticated ones, they quantify risk systematically. They often use specific contingency buffers tied to high-risk areas. So instead of adding a flat 5% to the whole job, they might say, the main switchgear installation is complex. We'll apply a 15% labor contingency to that specific task.
I see. So it's targeted.
It's targeted risk management. It's not guesswork.
It sounds like a very independent, almost isolated job, but that's another area where the reality is different. Estimators are central communicator.
Far from isolated. They are constantly collaborating. Internally, they work closely with project managers and operations teams to understand current crew productivity rates from active jobs. And externally, they are liaisons with GCs, owners, engineers, and of course those vital vendors. Their estimate is the data point that informs massive organizational decisions.
And their job isn't over when the bid goes out the door. Once the contract is won, that estimator plays a crucial role in the project handoff, right?
That handoff is critical to making the project profitable. They need to explain their entire estimate structure, clarify every scope exclusion, detail which labor units were applied, and help the operations team, the people who actually have to execute the work, understand how the job was priced. In successful companies, that seamless collaboration between estimating and operations is key. It ensures the field crew executes the estimate rather than fighting against it.
Let's talk about the tools of the trade, because the days of, scaling drawings with a ruler are pretty much gone.
The technology has advanced dramatically. It enables speed and consistency, but it does not replace the mind of the estimator. They rely heavily on specialized estimating software, of course, but also advanced digital takeoff tools. And these are often integrated with 3D modeling environments like building information modeling or BIM.
How does BIM change the game for an estimator?
Well, it allows them to move beyond just 2D counting. With model-based estimating, the software can automatically identify and count every light fixture or receptacle in a defined area, which saves a tremendous amount of time.
But there's a catch, I assume.
There is. Here's the kicker. The software counts the objects. The estimator must still apply the judgment. The software knows there are 100 outlets. The estimator has to know if those 100 outlets are going into prefabricated walls or into a 1920s brick building that requires extensive concrete cutting.
So the difficulty factor remains a human judgment call.
Exactly. The tools enable structured, defensible estimates, but the human knowledge is what makes it financially viable. It's a perfect blend of tech skill and experience.
So for someone maybe considering this as a career path, what does success look like? What are the essential non-technical skills you need to thrive?
Beyond the ability to read plans, a lot of it comes down to mindset and communication. Successful estimators have to be meticulously detail-oriented. You can't miss a $500,000 piece of gear. But they also have to retain sight of the project's big picture. And clear, concise communication is just non-negotiable, both written for bid submissions and verbal when you're justifying costs.
And I'd imagine they need to be disciplined, organized, and comfortable with ambiguity.
That's a crucial point. They often have to make significant high-stakes decisions with incomplete information, especially during early design phases. They're the ones who have to put a price on the unknown. And maybe most essentially, they need a high level of curiosity. They have to be the person who constantly asks the clarifying questions, searches for missing specs, and looks for discrepancies. That constant search for clarity is a major driver of their accuracy.
Now, let's talk about the market for these professionals. Why is demand for this role rising so sharply, and why is it getting harder to hire them?
We're seeing unprecedented demand, and it's driven by really three main factors. First, projects are just fundamentally more complex today, and the electrical scope, with smart building controls, automation, complex life safety systems, is a continuously expanding piece of the total construction cost.
So more complexity means you need more expertise for that initial financial assessment.
Exactly. Second, the industry is facing a big demographic challenge. We're seeing a massive wave of experienced pros retiring faster than new talent is entering the pipeline. And third, contractors have finally realized this role isn't just administrative support. They now see estimating as a core profitability engine for the whole business.
It's a strategic function.
It is. A great estimator defines their competitive edge.
And that demand, coupled with the specialized skill set, that must translate into some pretty substantial career benefits.
Oh, absolutely. This role offers strong job security, very competitive salaries, and clear upward mobility. You can move into senior estimating, pre-construction management, even high-level leadership positions. For people who thrive on knowledge and problem solving, but maybe without the physical demands of fieldwork, estimating is an elite path. It's a career where your value only increases with every year of experience you get.
So what does this all mean for the construction world? We've covered everything from counting individual wire nuts to managing massive multi-million-dollar contractual risks.
I think the essential takeaway is that electrical estimators are far more than just highly skilled number crunchers. They are the company's frontline risk managers, their master planners, and their decisive financial strategists. Their work truly shapes the economic viability of every single project before a contractor ever commits a single resource.
That's the key, isn't it? When you stop and think about it, consider how much financial success and risk mitigation hinges on this one early stage of work. It just goes to show that a seemingly technical role that involves reading blueprints is fundamentally about predicting the future consequences of design choices and installation realities. It's what gives an organization a true competitive advantage. Thank you for joining us today.